So I have 9:30 on my watch. What about you guys? Yep. Okay. So, are you ready, Peter? Because you're talking first. It's only going to take me a moment or so.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. This is Jim Lacey from the State Cartographer's Office. Welcome to the webinar on the V1 Parcel Project and the Interim Report. So thanks for taking some time out this morning and talking to us today. So I'm going to actually, we're going to get right to the content as quickly as possible. I want to talk about a couple of webinar protocols, if you will, first before we get going here. If you've dialed in via phone, if you've not already, please do type in the audio pin you see probably over on the right side of your screen. That would be great. That allows us to keep the phone lines muted so we don't have any awkward feedback during the course of the presentations. And we are going to keep everybody muted during the presentation, and we're going to accept questions, which I'll talk about actually right now. So if you do have questions, there's a window over on the right side of your screen. You can type in questions. I'll be reading those questions back to the audience, and the panelists here will answer those questions for everybody. We've got 58 people online, which is great. We're thrilled with that kind of response to this. With that number of people online, it makes opening up the phone lines a little bit awkward, so we're going to try to handle questions as best we can via the chat window, the question window, and handle it that way. I will mention if disaster should strike, which does happen with technology from time to time, our protocol is going to be we're going to reboot everything essentially, and we're going to ask everybody to dial back in. So if anything should lock up, that's going to be our plan. We're not going to try to reschedule later in the day or anything like that. We're just going to immediately reboot the webinar and handle things that way. So we have roughly about 20 or so minutes of presentations planned, followed by, well, really as much time as you guys want to take for questions, but we're tentatively shooting for about up to 40 minutes or so of questions, question and answers moving forward. So with that, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to hand it over to our first presenter, and that would be Peter from DOA. So if I want to get the next slide up there. So Peter, if you want to take it from here, that would be great.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Peter Harried. I'm the grant administrator for the Wisconsin Land Information Program at the Department of Administration. In a quick overview, we'll talk about the V1 Project Interim Report, so the version 1 Statewide Parcel Map Database Project Interim Report, and its recommendations. The interim report was emailed out by our program manager, Land Information Program Manager Mike Fries, on June 30th. It's also available on the State Cartographer's Office's website, as well as linked from the Department of Administration Land Information Program website. So first of all, the version 1 Statewide Parcel Map Database Project is a collaboration between the Land Information Program and the State Cartographer's Office. And the State Cartographer's Office staff has been leading on this project and drafting this interim report, the recommendations, and actually creating the statewide parcel layer. The primary project objectives for the version 1 project have been to establish a statewide parcel map layer by integrating county-level data sets as well as some municipal-level data sets from all known existing parcel data stewards. So we collected this information from the Wisconsin local governments. State Cartographer's Office staff inventoried and aggregated the parcel data sets into a statewide parcel geospatial database. This will be online by the end of this month. Another project objective was to recommend a searchable format for parcel attributes online as required by statute. Finally, a project objective was also to make recommendations for WLIP Strategic Initiative Grants for parcel map development at the local level. The V1 project has been a positive interaction with counties and cities gathering parcel data to create the statewide layers. This is both encouraging and educational. This learning by doing experience is ideal to improve upon future versions of the parcel map layer. The project not only informed recommendations on how to improve the process of aggregating local parcel data sets, but also informed the objectives and recommendations for improving upon local parcel data sets, because, as you know, the statewide parcel layer is only as good as the data sets from which it is built. Also important in making these recommendations was the large amount of engagement with stakeholders. We have attended over 60 County Land Information Council meetings, had several meetings with DOR in order to coordinate efforts, attended stakeholder meetings of Lion, WLIA, the Real Property Listers, Register of Deeds, County Surveyors Association. We also do an annual WLIP survey to counties. Last year's survey did focus on parcel mapping in particular, as well as the 2012 WLIP survey. Finally, we surveyed SAGIC members, State Agency Geographic Information Committee, on state agency needs for parcel data. And this supplemented the information that was collected by our WLIA task force back in 2007 on state agency parcel data needs. So to move on to the concept of benchmarks. Now, this concept was laid out in the planning process framework document in 2014, which was sent out to stakeholders for review and generally got a favorable response on the concept, and also the concept of strategic initiative grants at $50,000 per county. A benchmark is a standard or achievement level on a specific measure of data quality and completeness. The benchmarks will be priorities for each county's strategic initiative grant. This benchmark concept is consistent with our program administrative rule, which requires standards for the strategic initiative grants. The benchmarks will be the ordered list of priorities for each county's strategic initiative grant. And as I stated before, the recommendations for benchmarks come from the experience in creating the V1 Statewide Parcel Layer, the statutory requirement for counties to have certain parcel information online in a standard searchable format, and the extensive stakeholder interaction we've thus far completed. Now to move on to some examples that illustrate the need for benchmarks. The next couple of maps I'm going to show were created by our new Geographic Information Officer, Jim. And this one shows the land use classification map. It's one attribute listed by Act 20 and in statute. It shows potential for this attribute when it is complete to create a statewide land use classification layer. But the challenges are quite evident. So first, the white areas are areas where there was no data collected. This might be because there's no parcel information in GIS, or the county didn't provide it, or it wasn't obvious where it was. The gray areas are where there was data, but they were all of null values, so it wasn't useful. And then if you can see more closely, perhaps not in your PowerPoint view, but more detailed, close examination of the map shows that there's a lack of uniformity in the land use classifications, that they differ very much from county to county in some areas of the state. So we would like in the next version to have a complete land use map, and then pose the questions and maybe not answer them right away as to the lack of uniformity. The next map shows school district, and again, this one is not complete. The white areas where there was no data, the gray areas where there's null data, and we'd like to be able to have the capability to create a statewide school districts layer derived from the statewide parcel layer. I will mention that this was a simple exercise. So Jim, the Geographic Information Officer, when he created this map, just used the school district coding and did not use the school district name field, and did not use the separate school district layers that were sent in addition to the parcel data sets from some counties. But this does show the potential, but also the challenges and the need for benchmarks in order to meet our objectives with the statewide layer. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Howard, who's going to talk about the recommended benchmarks in the V1 Interim Report.
Thanks, Peter. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning. I want to say a few words about the benchmarks that are identified in the report. The V1 Interim Report identified 4 benchmarks for submission of parcel data. The first of those really simply relates to submission of the parcel fabric and zoning data with the required Act 20 attributes attached to that. The second benchmark is essentially the same as that, but also includes some additional parcel attributes that would be of value to the broader community. And then number 3, the third benchmark relates to completion and filling in of gaps in the parcel network, while the fourth benchmark relates to the completion of the PLSS fabric and integration of that information into the parcel fabric or the parcel network. We really tried very hard to strike a balance between meeting the statewide strategic objective, which ultimately, of course, is a complete, richly attributed parcel database that's also tied into PLSS, while simultaneously offering some flexibility to the counties to complete and submit their data in a way that minimized the impacts on workflows and data formats and things like that. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, but if you do look at the interim report online, there are a series of standards related to data format and quality that are identified, things like domain values, metrics for completeness, and so on, and also to some extent positional accuracy for PLSS corner points. We did work with the Department of Revenue, and the XML standard that the DOR requires is indeed an option for submission of data for the V2 project, which will be in the first quarter of 2016. The one caveat being that the DOR XML standard currently doesn't include geometry, and there's at least one missing Act 20 attribute. So subject to those caveats, we did work with DOA in that topic. There are 2 options for submitting data, a searchable format and an export format. This slide, which is also contained, the information here is contained in the V1 report, highlights some of the differences between these. Ultimately, the searchable format is a uniform statewide format that reflects how the data is actually stored online, and it's structured in such a way to facilitate visualization of the data and searching of data as required under the statute. Currently, for the V2 submission in first quarter of 2016, we're also anticipating that many counties will want to submit data in a more flexible export format standard, which actually is a variety of different standards that allows data to be submitted in GIS format, text file format, and with the caveats I mentioned earlier in the Department of Revenue XML format. So the export format is kind of a step toward achieving the searchable format, but ultimately we believe counties will need to meet the searchable format that is at a later date, presumably by 2018, when we're looking at, I think, the V4 call for data. Finally, this slide, which is included in the interim report on page 2, is important for clarifying the distinction between the benchmarks, which are shown in the columns of this table, and the 2 different formats that can be used by counties to submit data, which are the rows of this table. And as we've tried to, it can be confusing. We're trying to simplify and explain through this table how these 2 aspects, the formats and the benchmarks, relate to each other, and this table does a nice job of showing that. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more detail in the V1 report, and I certainly would encourage anyone who has technical questions to contact myself or Cody, David at the State Cartographer's Office, since we, this team really, was the technical team leading this project. So I will leave it with that and pass it over to Cody.
Okay, thanks, Howard. These 2 formats are supported by data standards, and these standards are applied to both the export and searchable format. As Howard mentioned, there are some commonalities and there's some differences between how these standards are applied to the 2 formats. And a definition of these standards is included in the report and its supporting appendices. So this specifically includes documentation on condo modeling, attribute schema, and domain rules. One commonality between the export and searchable format is the way that condos are modeled across all data that is submitted, and these standards do not change between the export and searchable formats. On screen here, you can see that there are 4 general ways that condos can be modeled. These are, in fact, 4 of the 5 general ways that our team observed condo modeling occurring across the 72 counties, and the 5th being that of the relational model, where multiple tax pins are modeled to their respective tabular information by one-to-many relationships. But the 4 that you see here are acceptable for both formats, and we do anticipate that all counties, with the exception of those that are practicing relational models for their condos, will be able to submit without altering their data at all. So for more information on this report, the report in fact can be found at this URL at the top here on the SCO site. One large detailed PDF, that is the interim report. This is about 80-page document. It was written in collaboration by the V1 team at the DOA and the SCO, and its supporting appendices are in line with it right there.
This is Peter Harriet again. I'm going to speak for a little bit more about strategic initiative grants. Now, benchmarks are the recommended priorities for these grants, and I'm going to give a little bit more information on some additional recommendations for grant application and grant agreement requirements. First, there have been a number of questions about the local match requirement, and this was proposed in the cover letter that was sent with the report by Mike Fries on June 30th. So what we are proposing is 20% local match requirement to be comprised of non-WLIP funds. This would amount to $10,000 in non-WLIP funds, meaning the project would be $50,000 worth of grant funding and $10,000 worth of local match. What wasn't expressly stated in the letter, and perhaps should have been, was that county staff time could be used in kind to fund the match portion of the project. And also WLIP staff will be available to work with counties on how to meet this requirement. So I've got a number of questions from counties, but after talking to some individual ones, I was able to help them figure out how their county could indeed meet the match requirement. So there may be some more questions about this. Another question that did come up regarding match was when the match has to be completed. So the match would have to be provided by the end of the project period. For 2016 grants, this would mean by the end of March 31st, 2017, the grant project deadline. Next, I'll move on to projected timeline for these 2016 and 2017 grants. So one, we're in a comment period on these benchmark recommendations that will close August 7th, and then we'll work to finalize the benchmarks, which will be detailed in the 2016 WLIP grant application to be released by October 1st. We'll try to get it out earlier, but our objective is to get that application out by October 1st. Grant application deadline will likely be the end of the year. The grant projects would start at the beginning of 2016. We'll try to distribute the first 50% of the funds beginning of the grant project, and then the remaining 50% of the funds would be distributed upon project completion. The deadline for 2016 strategic initiative grant projects would be March 31st, 2017, which would also be the deadline for the prospective tentative V3 call for data. By October 1st, 2016, we'll try to get out the 2017 grant application, which would likely have the same or similar benchmarks as the 2016 grants. The deadline for 2017 grants would be March 31st, 2018. And this is when we'd want all counties to have achieved the searchable format standard for their county parcel data sets. This would also be the tentative V4 call for data deadline. So we're looking at a potential of 2 years of strategic initiative grant funding for parcel projects, with the final deadline for these strategic initiative grants being March 31st, 2018. Now, there may be more strategic initiative grants following 2017, but they could encompass other land information objectives beyond parcels. So now we'll go into a question and answer segment, and we're all here available in the same room to answer your questions. So as Jim described at the beginning, please type them in if you haven't done so already, and then Jim Lacey will field the questions, and the rest of us will answer them.
Okay, so we do have a bunch of questions, so let's get started on these. Again, feel free to please type in questions as we go here. So the first question from John. John asked, can you explain what zoning data you are looking for? General county zoning, shoreland zoning, floodplain zoning, or local zoning?
The answer to that, the types of zoning are in fact outlined in the interim report. So that will directly answer your question. Specifically, the types of zoning that we're looking for are county-specific zoning, so that would include a list of farmland preservation, shoreland, floodplain, airport protection, and of course, county general zoning.
Okay, thanks, Cody. All right, next question from Jeff. Is the strategic funding given in order of benchmarked number, i.e. a county must complete benchmark 1 before moving on to benchmark 2?
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Oh, yes, the question is just follow up on Howard. Yes, it is an ordered list, a hierarchical list. So first, you'd have to accomplish benchmark 1 to move on to 2, to 3, to 4. Though some counties may know in advance that they will already meet benchmarks, for instance, 1 through 3, so they could write their application with this in mind and have their application focus, for instance, on benchmark 4, PLSS.
The other thing I'll note is that benchmark 3 and 4, certain counties that have a higher priority set on PLSS can choose to do that PLSS first rather than fill in their parcel fabric first. So 3 and 4 might be reversed in some cases. That's subject to certain constraints and so on, and there's a flowchart diagram in your interim report that shows you county how to make that kind of decision.
Okay, next one. Next question from Derek. Can the strategic initiative grant be used to hire staff? We're behind on PLSS network coordinates, so if we could hire someone part-time to collect that data, it would be helpful.
Could you restate that question?
Yeah, can you hire staff on the grants?
Oh, yes, yes. With all WIP grants, there's no requirement that that you either use county staff on the project or conversely that you hire outside contractors, outside staff to work on the project. So there are no requirements regarding whether it is a contracted person or a county staff person.
Great, thanks. So this next question from John is really a two-part question, so I'll start with the first part. I see PLSS as a benchmark. Are we placing a lower priority on PLSS on state or county-owned forest lands? So lower priority on state or county-owned forest lands.
There's flexibility given to county. We're not stipulating priorities internally within a county. The one exception being that if the parcel fabric's not complete, the areas with incomplete parcel, in terms of PLSS network, need to get done first. So it's not a requirement that the counties necessarily focus on the boundary first or county-owned forest lands first or anything like that.
Okay. So the second part of the question is, does this mean that a county with a huge amount of forest lands will not be able to complete the parcel benchmarks until all PLSS are complete?
Well, technically that is true, that the PLSS fabric needs to be complete throughout the county to complete benchmark number 4. But again, there's flexibility provided in terms of the accuracy requirements of the PLSS, of the coordinates on those corner points. with a set of different accuracy levels available. We understand. In other words, we recognize that not all PLSS corner points are of equal importance, and there may be cases where corner points, the accuracy requirements may not be particularly high. So we're trying to provide flexibility for counties to make that determination themselves.
Okay, thanks, Howard. So the next question here from Dave is the fifth bullet on timeline should be 2016. I'm not sure which bullet that might be referring to.
Probably on your projected timeline.
Cody, do you want to go back a slide? Bear with us a moment.
Yep.
So the question, fifth bullet on timeline should be 2016, question mark. October, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. March 31st of 2017.
March 31st, 2017 would be the deadline for 2016 Strategic Initiative Grant projects to be completed. The grant agreements for 2016 Strategic Initiative Grants would be executed early 2016, so we'd want to give counties a full year to complete their grant projects. So that means, for instance, if a county can't meet benchmark 1 and 2 for the V2 call for data, then it should be able to use the 2016 Strategic Initiative Grant to meet it for the V3 call for data, which would happen in the first quarter of 2017.
All right, thanks, Peter. Thanks for clarifying. So next question from Adam is, how do you suggest handling parcels which are in multiple school districts?
Parcels split by school district? Discretion would have to be used, or whatever the current supporting data is reflecting. That's what I would answer to that.
Okay. Sounds like that's maybe an issue we haven't specifically perhaps dealt with yet, so more of a technical thing we'll be working forward in the future. Good question, though.
Yep.
Okay, so next question from Melanie. What is the formal communication process for getting changes or observed errors back to the data sources?
Go ahead.
Well, I'm just interpreting the question back to the data sources.
I'll read it again. What is the formal communication process for getting changes or observed errors back to the data sources? So what I interpret here is if someone is using the parcel data, the parcel V1 data set, and notice a problem, how might they communicate that back to the data, I guess, custodian, if you will?
Yeah, I don't think that's something we've necessarily addressed at this point.
Well, it's kind of how you do it normally. You know, when people see something that's wrong on your website, they would communicate that to you, and you would make the changes, and the changes would show up in the next version. I don't think we're going to get in the business of fixing your data, so it's got to be in your workflow.
So I'll add a little bit more context. So Melanie works for a state agency who's asking this question, so I think what she's driving at here is if she should observe a issue with the data set that was derived from original county source, who might she contact? Would she contact the team here? Would she contact the county? That's how I interpret the question.
Or the county.
Okay. Another good question. I think it's one we need to continue thinking about.
Yeah. And I guess I didn't give a fair introduction at the beginning that we do have our new Geographic Information Officer here, Jim Giuliano. And sorry, I keep butchering his last name. So Jim Giuliano, which is a common problem with my last name too, so don't feel too bad for him. But we're excited to have him here. He started June 29th, and he's already been helping us out with this project. So he was able to chime in just now, and we appreciate his assistance. And we hope you get a chance to meet him. He was at the last WLA conference in Eagle River, and he'll be at the next ones. So we're glad to have him on board.
Okay, lots of questions coming in. That's great. So next one here from Michelle. Please clarify parcel fabric. Is this the Esri parcel fabric?
No, the answer is no. That's just a term we're using. It just means the parcel network or the parcel matrix, you know, the set of parcels in an area.
Great clarification. Next one from John. Not all of our townships participate in countywide general zoning. How should that be handled?
So not all the townships participate in countywide zoning. That is very common throughout Wisconsin. Some counties have a combination of towns with town zoning, no zoning, or county zoning. So the responsibility is just for the information maintained by the county, and we're interpreting this as to be the zoning administered by the county. So if there's a county zoning ordinance, then the county is responsible for it and for maintaining it and for providing it for the V1 project. So we're just looking for towns that are governed by county zoning.
Great. Next one from Brad. How do we handle zoning that does not follow parcel boundaries? Zoning that does not follow parcel boundaries.
The zoning submission is in fact distinct from the parcel submission, so that is perfectly fine if your zoning boundaries do not coincide with actual discrete parcel boundaries. It is in fact two distinct geometries.
Okay. Mitch from Madison wants to know how the data will be distributed.
At this point, our team is working on creating an interactive map for displaying the parcel data, but that'll also be accompanied by an ArcGIS open data interface for downloading the data similar to those that you've seen out there. And then along with that, full database downloads are going to be available via some type of FTP link.
Next question from Michelle. Michelle asks, please provide more detail on V2 benchmark number 1 regarding condo geometry. We have a polygon for the condo and points for the units. Is that sufficient? So benchmark 1, condo geometry.
You have to take a look at that in detail, right?
I think so. We'd be interested in hearing or talking more about this specific case, and definitely working to accommodate your special case.
So Michelle, why don't you get in touch with Cody directly? I would say is probably appropriate. If you need Cody's contact info, you can contact me.
Yep, please do. Thank you.
Otherwise, maybe do we have that information at the end? Contact info?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So stand by for that. All right. Another one from Michelle. If the county does not have general zoning authority, is the county required to submit general zoning?
No, it's just for zoning ordinances administered by the county.
Okay. Next one from Lori. Uh-oh. It starts out, to play devil's advocate, what are the consequences of not meeting these benchmarks on time? Consequences. Good question.
So the benchmarks are for the Strategic Initiative Grants. So the grants have a deadline, which would be about 1.25 years. So I guess it kind of depends on the situation, but we'd like counties to strive to meet the grant project deadline. And some, if there are some situations where that is not possible and the county's made a good faith effort, we could give them a grant extension, perhaps. So we'd work with counties on an individual basis.
Okay. I'm just scanning through some questions here. So the next one from Derek. So essentially the statewide parcel mapping initiative and the strategic initiative grant are really one big project. I guess I'll insert there, tied together. I'll read that again. Essentially the statewide parcel mapping initiative and the strategic initiative grant are really one big effort, or tied together.
I would say yes, for the at least for the next couple of years.
Okay. Moving on from Mark, what will be the searchable formats required? Our county by resolution restricts search by name, but names are available within results. What searchable formats are required relating to names specifically, looks like?
So because the searchable format by name.
What will be? I'll read again. What will the searchable formats? Wait a minute. I'm trying to reread the wording here. Bear with me. The searchable formats. What searchable formats are required? Our county by resolution restricts search by name. The names are available within results, so they can't search by name. And what basically the question is that going to be available in the statewide version? I think is the basic gist of the question.
So we're still working on that issue, but with the statewide GIS layer, the attribute field will be searchable by any of the attribute fields. So there would be search by name. However, there may not be a search by name tool directly on the application. So we're still working on that, but I would default to yes, there would be search by name capability. And we're asking counties to participate by offering the parcel owner names. However, if there's a county policy of not including owner name, then if that's written down and documented, then we could allow counties not to include owner name, at least initially for the V2 version of the parcel map, is what we're thinking. But this is, an evolving and difficult subject, and we're still working out how to exactly handle it as county policies evolve as well.
So for the next submission, we are asking counties to pre-redact names within the data that's submitted if a handful of names, for example, need to be removed.
Great. Next one. Are the strategic initiative grants just for counties?
Well, technically by statute and administrative rule, the Department of Administration can only award strategic initiative grants to counties. However, the benchmarks are for the entire countywide area. So they would also apply to areas in which the cities manage the parcel data sets. So there could be some pass-through funding or multi-jurisdictional grant structures for these strategic initiative grants. However, the county would be the main grant contact.
Okay. Next question from Alan related to zoning. Zoning codes are not standardized in various municipalities. How will information be shown and how will various codes be translated? So standardization across zoning between municipalities.
So we don't intend to attempt at all to crosswalk different zoning codes across different jurisdictions. The code that will exist in there will be jurisdiction specific, and when the user is utilizing the specific zoning layer, they'll be able to click on a description that will point them to the appropriate documentation of what those codes mean.
Okay, next one. Next one from Janice. Many school districts have territory in more than one county. When can we expect that information from all counties will be in the system so accurate school district boundary maps can be created? So essentially, when is that information going to be available to school districts?
So I guess as soon as counties can get it in the shape that it can be used for a complete statewide layer, I think the ultimate deadline is March 31st, 2018 for county data submittal to have it in that searchable format, in which we'll be certain that we can put it in that statewide layer in a complete format. Do you want to add anything? So, but we're hoping before then that we'll be able to do the statewide school district layer. And that example I showed earlier was just a simple exercise. Like I said, we just used the school district code field. If we would have used additionally the school district name field and additionally some of the separate school district layers emailed in, then we would have been able to create a more complete school district layer for the state. Maybe not absolutely complete, but much closer to. So that's encouraging. So hopefully V2, V3 will have a complete school district layer for the state derived from the statewide parcel map layer.
Okay. Next one, do you need zoning data inside city and villages?
I think I basically answered that question earlier. No, it would just be the zoning administered by counties. So if it's not a county's ordinance, then we don't need it.
Okay. In using the parcel data, when will the data be considered final for a particular year? In using the parcel data, when will the data be considered final for a particular year?
We'll have formal release dates of each version of the development. So this version 1 development release will be coming in a couple of weeks, and that'll be posted to the DOA site, the SCO site.
I think maybe the question means the source data. So when the counties submit it, it's not going to be changed beyond their submittal date. So for instance, when we asked for data in 2016 for B2, is when the county submits it, for instance, February 1st, it's not going to be, we're not going to accept additional or improved versions, later in the year in the summer. June 1st, the county says, I have an updated version. Well, we're going to go with the version we got back in February 1st. And we're trying to time it in the first quarter of each year so it coincides with the tax roll update process. So by asking it for the first quarter of 2016, we're going to get the most current tax roll information that was completed for 2015.
Okay, so this next question I'm going to have to interpret just a little bit to make sure I've got the language right. So earlier you said that if the county, contact the county if there's an issue with the parcel, a problem is noticed, contact the county. And if the parcels in the statewide data set are months or years old, will that be made very apparent so we don't constantly field questions as to why the data is not up to date? So if their data is months old, and how is that made apparent in the statewide data set, V1, V2, et cetera?
I think that would be obvious on the splash screen that comes up with on the application for the statewide layer. So there's going to be a statement as to how old the data set is, when it was created, to address that concern. I understand the county's perspective. They don't, so we'll try to make that abundantly clear on the website.
As well as the data download, the metadata will support the same sort of message.
And I think the primary contact for the statewide layer would be DOA or SCO, and we could help filter some of those questions. And if it's appropriate to send it to the county, we'll send it on. But if it is such a question that we can easily answer so that there's not confusion, then we'll first answer that question.
Okay, next one from Dan. How often will the parcel data be updated from each data source?
So I guess initially it would be updated on an annual basis to follow the tax roll update process, which is an annual process.
Okay. Next one's a comment. Please post the names and contact info for the individuals who presented. We will definitely make that information available. Thanks for that feedback. Next question from Michelle. How are you addressing new parcel creation versus January 1 assessment date, i.e. parcel exists in geometry, however no assessment tax data till the following year? So how are you addressing new parcel creation versus January 1 assessment date?
I'll just respond to that one. As Peter mentioned, the current plan is to do a once-a-year release of the data. That could change in future. It could be more frequent, and certainly we understand that parcels change more frequently than that. We're trying to define a window in the first quarter of the year in order to capture the most recent tax information, and we recognize that there may be some disconnect with parcel geometry, but given that in the 72 counties of the state there's a wide amount of variability in terms of how frequently parcels are updated and when they're updated, it's really difficult to solve that problem. The disconnect, there are always going to be some parcels that are either not in the tax roll or vice versa. So we try to minimize that, but that's what all can be done at this point.
Just direct them to the county website,
right,
and say, look it up.
Okay, next one from Adam. Adam wants to know roughly what % of counties already meet benchmarks 1, 2, 3, and 4? Or 4, doesn't specify.
I think we're trying to look at this, and I think it's really hard to say for benchmarks 1 and 2, especially for the searchable format standard is what you want all counties to achieve by March 31st, 2018. So I guess we won't really know until we get the data sets in, beginning with the V2 call for data. We have a rough idea from V1 and from our Link Wisconsin EBM project, and particularly for the V1, we noticed that a lot of counties didn't supply in full all of the attributes requested for various reasons, partially because it can be a complex link between multiple, or complex join between multiple databases at the county level, and some attributes simply got left out. But we are interested to see how many counties can meet benchmark 1 and 2 right off the bat. We know that for benchmark 3, there are about 9 counties without complete parcel fabric, and we estimate for benchmark 4, just based on 2013 survey data, that 20 counties roughly may have complete PLSS, satisfactory complete PLSS, and what we mean by that is all the corners have been remonumented, they have high degree of accuracy and GPS coordinates on all the corners, or all of the that are feasible, that makes rational according to the county's plan. The tie sheets are all documented online, and that the GPS coordinates are integrated into the parcel fabric. That's 4 criteria, and we're not sure of those 20 that maybe meet it, how many of those really meet all 4 of the criteria.
I'll just add to that. I think that even though, given what Peter said, I think that we feel that 100% of counties are very close to benchmark number 1. I mean, benchmark number 1 essentially is the data submission that was already done for V1, which all counties did, with the addition of some missing attributes in some cases, and some additional documentation to help support interpretation of attribute names and domain values and things like that. So, we anticipate that V1 is a very achievable benchmark for all 72 counties in a relatively with a relatively limited amount of effort.
Okay, next one from Brian. If a county does not have general zoning and the county also does not have current or existing digital data, are they required to create the data? I'll read it again. If a county does not have general zoning and does not have current or existing digital data, are they required to create it?
I could answer that. I mean, the purpose of the Strategic Initiative Grants is to get all counties up to those certain benchmark levels. So if there is missing data of some type, that's the purpose of the Strategic Initiative Grants. So those grants would be used, for example, to complete digitization of zoning data if that's not currently available in digital format.
I think maybe he was referring to digital data for parcels as well.
Not sure.
I think we answered as best we could.
Okay. This next question, I'm not sure we may be prepared to answer this today, but I'm going to ask the group and let you decide. Isn't the owner of the parcel Isn't the owner of the parcel public information? So the owner information in the parcel, is that public information? By what law can the county withhold that data from submission? So that's a very good question. Good question.
But we're not lawyers, so
Thank goodness.
So I don't think that's something we can answer today. It's a great question, though, that needs to be addressed. Not by us right now. Sorry. Next question from Alan. Do you work with DPI to obtain school district information?
I think that we have worked with DPI. I think that they would be interested in county-based school district information. I'm not sure that they independently have collected school district data. But
I'm aware of a project that's going on right now for refining the school district boundaries, utilizing legal descriptions of sort. This version 1 layer once it becomes available, as well as some jurisdictionally specific data. So in that sense, this layer can advise projects of that nature to hopefully create a very fine school district layer across the state.
Okay. Next one from Adam. There are a few counties with a long way to go with parcels and PLSS. Is there a realistic estimate of the number of counties that may miss the 2018 deadlines? If so, is there a plan to catch them up?
I guess the real, it kind of depends on what you mean by the deadline. So each individual grant project has a specific deadline. So it's defined by the grant application. So as long as the county sets out and accomplishes the scope of work that it committed to in the grant application, it would meet the deadline for that particular grant. Now you could interpret the question, do we expect that all counties will have satisfactory completion of their PLSS by March 31st, 2018? Not likely, no. But will they come closer to that goal? Yes.
All right, next one from Mitch. Is there going to be an effort to standardize tax key and address information?
Yes, there already is efforts that we've employed for the V1 project, as well as our previous project, the Link Wisconsin Parcel Mapping Project, Parcel Mapping Project, to standardize address elements. This, by nature, is to parse out the individual address elements and to standardize those to some degree. For tax key, what is represented in the V1 layer and what we anticipate doing for future iterations is to represent the tax key as it exists in its native form.
Okay, thanks, Cody. So this next question I think we may have addressed, but I'm going to read it anyway just to make sure. In the next data request, is the timing going to reflect the end of the year tax roll close date? Our real property listers usually don't close out and reconcile with the parcels until the second or third month of the calendar year. So I think we've addressed that.
Yes, so the call for data would happen shortly after the beginning of the year. So shortly after January 1st, we'd make the call for data, but the deadline for responding to the call for data would not be until likely March 31st, to give those counties plenty of time that need an additional month or two to reconcile the parcel data set with the tax roll completion at the end of 2015.
All right, next one from Justin. Is there an empty feature class with the correct schema available?
Yes, this is included as one of the appendices with the interim report, and you can find this on the SCO site in line with the rest of the appendices and the final report.
I think the question relates to, is there a digital version of that, not just a...
Yes, it's an empty feature class in geodatabase
okay.
for both zoning and parcels.
Okay, answer is yes. Excellent. Also from Justin, will there be plans to automate this process, possibly looking at LTSB's CBAS as a model? This current process places the burden on counties.
I'll jump in here. I know Cody might have something to say. Yes, there is. We are very interested in standardizing the process, and in fact, that is the reason why there is a searchable format that we're trying to move toward as a standard for all counties to follow. But even a process where we would integrate with LTSB would require that data being submitted to that be in a standardized format. In fact, a much more standardized format than we're talking about for the V2 submission and the export format. So I slightly disagree with the assertion that this puts the burden on the counties. Certainly there is a requirement that counties do some manipulation of their data to at least reach that, at minimum, reach that export standard for V2. However, the real reason for moving toward a more searchable format is to reduce the burden on the side of data integrators, because merging together 72 plus data sets with different formats and different standards for domains and spellings and so on is an inefficiency that we want to eliminate. So short answer, yes. Standardization, yes. Automation, yes. And big, bold neon sign saying standards flashing over the whole operation. Want to add anything, Cody?
Nope.
Okay, so we just have a few questions. If anybody has additional questions, keep those rolling in. Otherwise, I think we're getting down to the end here. Next question, can we get a copy of the presentation slides? Definitely. We actually are recording this webinar. The whole webinar will be available, and the slides will be available, I presume. I'm looking at Cody as well. Okay, excellent. Next one, bear with me while I read the question. This relates back to school districts. DPI facilitates the process in law that allows various types of boundary changes, but we provide the information about approved changes to county and municipal clerks who are responsible for recording the parcels. So I think this was basically addressing the question earlier about working with DPI. So I think I'll just leave it at that. It's not so much a question as it is a clarification. So we'll leave it at that for now. Okay, the last question we've got here, unless any additional ones come in from Nathan, who will determine what benchmarks have been met? How will that process work? So who will determine what benchmarks have been met, and how will that process work?
So there is this is detailed more thoroughly in the interim report. Essentially, there's a set of sort of compliance standards that are, as well as we can, demarcate what a county needs to do in order to hit that standard. And essentially, the database, when the databases are submitted, they'll be evaluated in terms of those compliance measures against that benchmark. So by intaking the data, ingesting it, and assessing it, we'll be able to tell where a county sits in terms of that benchmark. I think that answers the question. I hope it does.
Okay. Do you guys have any, here in the room, have any follow-up statements you want to make? I'd like to maybe pause for just a moment, letting additional questions come in. Anything else you guys want to add based on some of the questions we received? Anything else to add in general?
We wanted to thank everyone for participating in this workshop today, and also for those of you who contributed data and participated in our project in any way. We wanted to give you a big thank you for supporting the V1 project. I think it's an important project, and we're happy to see that we're moving forward in the state.
I'd just like to follow on Howard's comments, and yes, this has been a great precedent in terms of data sharing, that for both the Link Wisconsin, which was the broadband mapping project, we got 100% participation from all the counties and their address points and parcel data sets, and then for the version 1 statewide parcel project, we've gotten 100% participation. And there were a lot of doubters before we started that said that we couldn't get that level of participation, but all the counties proved them wrong, as well as the cities. So we're very thankful for that cooperation. I also want to say that following this stakeholder feedback comment period that ends August 7th, we'll be finalizing the benchmarks in the 2016 Strategic Initiative Grant application. And during the application period, we'll be available to help counties out in defining their Strategic Initiative Grant projects. And we'll also be available during the call for data to help counties meet benchmarks 1 and 2 in terms of complete parcel data set submittal. So we expect to spend a good amount of time assisting counties, both technically in terms of the GIS data submittal, but also technically in terms of filling out the application. So if you're a little nervous about the whole process, don't be, because we'll be on hand to help you out.
Yeah, I wanted to echo again what Peter was saying right there about assistance out to the counties, and I think we'll maybe be formalizing this a little bit more as we move into the next phase of the project. But having looked at 72 counties worth and plus some cities worth of data here in the SCO, there are techniques, methods, scripts, et cetera, that have been developed here that may very well be applicable in your own particular context, and we can certainly share those and assist you in some ways to move forward with improving your data.
Okay, why don't we take the final 3 questions that have come in, then we'll wrap up. We're almost, well, we are at an hour right now, which would be a good place. So the final 3 questions, this relates back to the previous question, and that is about who's doing the evaluation of the benchmarks. Is that the SCO or the DOA that's doing the evaluation of the benchmarks?
I think DOA is ultimately responsible for the grants, and the benchmarks are tied to the grant funding. But it will be a combination. So we'll rely on the technical assistance of and expertise of SCO staff to assess compliance with benchmarks 1 and 2. But it will be also reliant on the county's certification for benchmarks 3 and 4 in terms of their parcel fabric completion and satisfactory completion of the PLSS. So it's going to be a combination of DOA, which is ultimately responsible for the grant funding with the counties, and technical assistance by SCO. But as Howard mentioned, there is some information on compliance for each of the benchmarks in the report, in each section that gives more detail for each of the benchmarks.
Okay, next one. Can you share the link where we can download the empty feature classes? I mean, we don't need to do it right now, but I mean, we will share that information.
On the slide.
It's on one of these slides.
Okay, so yes, that information is going to be out there.
We don't have the actual
appendix.
So we'll make sure we get that out there. The last question before we wrap up here is the interim report ever going to change, or is it final? Is there going to be a final project versus an interim final project?
There is going to be a final project report in December of 2015, but the interim report will always stay the interim report. It's a different document.
Okay.
Well, we're on the topic Appendix L that's listed on the screen here. Under and at the URL that you're viewing on the very top is where you can find that template GIS file.
Great. Thanks, Cody. So with that, unless there's any other comments from the folks here, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time out. To echo what Howard and Peter said, we very much appreciate everyone's participation, not just in this webinar today, but also the project as a whole. It's been, I think, wildly successful, at least from my perspective, looking somewhat in from the outside. So I think it's been great. So thanks, everyone, for your time. We're going to wrap up there. Any questions? We had some contact information up there. Otherwise, you can send an email to WLIP@wisconsin.gov. That's WLIP@wisconsin.gov. Thanks. We'll let you get back to your day.